So welcome again. We're back in a very different spot this time, not in front of my bookcase, but instead in front of this lovely staircase that we found here in downtown Calgary. Daniel, you had some questions you had for me because I recently attended a week-long film festival here.
Which sounds very pretentious, but it
Super
wasn't.
pretentious.
It's a
No, it's all like
film fest.
science fiction-y, like geeky film festival that I went to, and it wasn't anything special. The big movie chain Cineplex here in Canada had this nationwide, so they had a bunch of films that they were showing over the course of about 10 days or so.
It's like, hey, titles are on Netflix. How can we get people to pay for them?
Pretty much, that's
Yeah.
exactly what happens too. These things are readily available, but let's fleece them for more money.
But tell me about this, Kyle. What
Yeah.
was it like seeing some of these films, Monty Python, for example,
Yeah.
in the big screen with an audience?
Really cool. There's two things. There's a kind of big criticism I'm going to leave to the end, but there is something to be said about seeing films on the big screen. Like Monty Python in particular. This is a movie I grew up on, a movie that my parents showed me when they probably shouldn't have shown it to me, to be perfectly honest. But that I love. I twittered out actually right after I saw it that I love Monty Python so much because I believe it's such a unique form of comedy. Yes, there's British comedy that's out there and it still gets made, but the Pythons were just very unique in what they were trying to do. It was very like cerebral, but still like kind of like lowbrow humor kind of mixed together. And I just think that while Life of Brian, which is the movie that came out after this, is maybe their most smart movie, this is their funniest movie that they made. And so seeing it on the big screen for the first time was kind of a revelation because there was things in certain scenes that I'd never really seen before. Like actually being able to see the guy's face inside of the Black Knight's helmet is something I've never actually picked up on before, and that's kind of cool to see that level of detail.
What about with an audience that is familiar with it?
Yeah.
I saw Lord of the Rings once on a big screen.
Sure.
The big laugh was, you can't just walk into Mordor.
Yeah,
which is,
yeah.
of course, not a funny line, but it is funny in this context.
Well,
Was it like that?
well, it's in the context of like the internet and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, people were ready for the lines that they always love, and it's so crazy in that movie in particular because there's so many great lines. So it's like, oh yeah, this is the scene for this one. Oh, and this is the scene for this one. My biggest criticism with all of the movies, though, except for a couple of exceptions, this was a digital projection, and I'm not against digital, but I am against bad digital projection. And in some cases, this feels like they were able to grab the DVD copy of it and then blow it up onto the big screen. So there's some graininess that was happening on some of the films. The blacks were in the right color, like you could see like pixelation kind of happening on them. So that was a bit of a shame, I felt, on some of the movies where it was obviously not the care and attention that should be placed on them. Yeah.
So you saw Monty Python, but you
Yeah.
also saw some movies that you hadn't seen before that, as someone who
Yeah.
knows many movies, were kind of surprised that you haven't seen these, Kyle.
Yeah.
What was that like to see? Tell us about one of those.
Yeah, there's going to be two that I'm going to point out in particular, because there's actually most of the films I went and saw this time are ones that I had not seen. So the two I'm going to pick out in particular are Brazil, which is a movie that I should have seen years and years ago, seeing as how I'm a huge fan of Terry Gilliam, and that actually leads really well into Monty Python because he was a member of the Pythons. He was the one who did the animations for the Pythons and went on to become a pretty famous film director who usually has the worst luck trying to make films. If you know anything about Terry Gilliam, it usually is some huge problem and catastrophe that happens in the making of one of his films. But Brazil is really this combination of Python humor, comedy, drama, science fiction, and kind of like a 1984 story all rolled into one, with all these actors that grew up to be that were actually, some were fairly famous, but some grew into their famousness. So we have like Ian Holm is in this, Robert De Niro is in it, Jonathan Pryce is in it. Like there's a whole bunch of these famous actors that I love, and this story that starts off fairly standard, where it's like, yes, this 1984 world where there's all these bureaucracy that's going on, and then kind of flutters into this like kind of I don't know, surrealistic painting almost is what happens to it, and yet still packs this really amazing emotional punch by the end of it.
So it works.
It totally works,
That's great.
and I'm so glad that I got to see it on the big screen for the very first time. That's the first time I was able to experience this movie, because it's definitely something I'm going to want to rewatch again and again and again. I would consider it definitely Terry Gilliam's masterpiece, which a lot of people do consider it as, and one that I would definitely recommend anyone go and see if they want to. But be prepared, this is not, again, one of those easy films. We like to talk about films that are not easy films to go and watch sometimes, but I really, really liked it.
And then what's the third film that you want to talk
Third
about?
film is, again, going to be one of those ones that's slightly unique because it is an anime film, Akira, and everyone has heard about Akira before, or a lot of people have heard about Akira. This is a pretty famous manga that got made into an animated film.
It's an adaptation then.
An adaptation, definitely, which a lot of the Japanese anime films actually are. This is a film that does influence a lot of live action films that came after it, specifically the science fiction elements it brings into play. There's a lot of horror that happens too. Now, in America, by and large, animated films are made for a children audience.
Right.
Whereas in Japan, a lot of the animated films, there can be kids animated films, but there's adult material.
Right.
They can have adult cartoons. And this is very much an adult cartoon because there is eviscerations, there's blood, there's body horror stuff at the end of it that just was like, I said it melted my face off after I saw it because there was just ridiculous, out there, crazy stuff that happens in this movie. But even though it's in a different language and it's dealing with this really high concept stuff, it is really at the basis of it, this guy who's been picked on and bullied throughout his life, discovers he has powers and decides instead of using this for good, he's going to seek vengeance basically on people. So it's kind of the telling of a super villain story instead of like a superhero story, which we get a lot
Like
nowadays.
Chronicle, sounds like.
Well, actually, it's
that.
funny that you bring that up because Chronicle borrowed very heavily from the last act of this film.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you obviously would recommend doing this kind of experience.
Yeah.
A local theater putting
I
on.
mean, I would recommend anyone go to any film festival anyways. I've been to other film festivals where they're showing new movies that are being released, and there you can find these little neat little gems that when I got to see a film called Another Year years ago before it came out into theaters, like a few months before it came out into theaters, and it's those films, it's like, I got to see this a little bit before everyone else did, and before the buzz and stuff started
Which
to
here in
happen.
Calgary is very special.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to somebody then who is going to see one of these more local, not so brand new film festivals like this?
Well, I would
choosing films?
just research it. I mean, I think the best thing to go with is if movies for the most part, if it's not like Sundance or the Toronto Film Festival, it's more of one of your local cities film festival. It's probably a film that's been in other film festivals before it's come there. So go and look at the fan favorites. Go and look at what people are saying coming from those film festivals, and narrow down which one or two you want to go and see.
Okay.
Because you can get really overwhelmed by all the choices that you get. It was crazy. I went and saw 9 films this week. Sometimes seeing 2 or 3 films on a night. You don't have to do that.
And of course, if you're lucky enough to find a real film festival where they're premiering films, definitely grab the chance to do that.
Oh, yeah.
If you have the chance to have a director show up after to answer questions, it's a great
absolutely.
chance. So if you've seen any of these film festivals before or plan on attending one, do let us know below.
Yeah.
And if you've seen or now plan on seeing any of the films that Kyle mentioned, let us know what you think.
For sure. And then our social media links are going to be showing up on the screen here right now. Click on them if you want to down below. That is totally up to you. We'll see you again next time.